All right, Battletech enthusiasts, we've got an incoming question here from the perspective of a new player. Truly, the golden age of Battletech. I mean, the starter sets, Game of Armored Combat, we've got the Catalyst plastics, we've got the Iron Wind metal miniatures, we've got 3D printed miniatures. I mean, the amount of Battletech stuff that is out there in the wild, plus updated hex maps, custom hex maps, terrain. I mean, it's amazing. It is absolutely amazing, and it shows no possibility of slowing down. So from the perspective of a new player, this could be a little bit overwhelming. Especially since Battletech, as it has evolved on the rule set, scales up and down. It's not limited to just one scope. And what I mean by that is certainly mechs, Knights of the Realm, Knights of the Future, that is the main focus in Battletech. The mechs are going to occupy a very, very central place. Many of your battles are going to involve mechs. But if we read the narrative, I mean, certainly even if you look at the technical manuals, it is total warfare. There's vehicles, there's tanks, there's artillery, there's infantry, there's air support, there's dropships, there's naval units. Everything is in this game. And you can, as a player, you can plug in what you want in that combination. You can agree ahead of time, hey, we're just going to play mechs. Or we've got 8K battle value, bring whatever you want. I mean, one game, it was really hard for me because here's what the problem I have with Battletech. There's too much cool stuff and I don't have enough battle value. So I want like lots of mechs, and I want lots of heavy tanks, and I want lots of air support, and I want my artillery, and I want lots of infantry. But I have to make choices somewhere. And there's always mechs that I want to play. But for this one game in particular, we agreed 5K battle value and just bring it and we'll fight. And I said, you know what? I'm going to just bring tanks and infantry. No mechs. And it was so hard because I'm like, maybe I'll sneak a mech in. Or maybe I'll bring like a light, low battle value lance. But I was like, no, just a complete planetary defense force. Let's do that. And it was a lot of fun. And the game played out. The rules play out no matter what you bring. So that is certainly a strength of Battletech. But shifting from the perspective of a new player, it can be overwhelming. Where do I go first? What do I buy first? How do I play? So I want to come up with an attack plan. Now, putting aside for the moment painting miniatures or not painting miniatures, you can choose to paint your Battletech miniatures. You can choose to play them as they are. And from that perspective in acquiring miniatures, I mean, this is kind of like Wargaming 101. You want to do your best to get all of your stuff painted. So this way you can play it painted on the table. And many of us have our pile of plastic of stuff that we're working on. And there's going to be times where you have to paint stuff. You haven't cleared your backlog, but you got some new miniatures. But this is a difference if you're new to Battletech and you have to paint a lance or two. That's reasonable. If you bought like 150 miniatures to have to paint those, that can be very intimidating. That can be very, very challenging. So coming up with an attack plan to paint, certainly it helps to know, hey, what order should I buy stuff in? There's also this idea, if you're new to Battletech, whether you paint your miniatures or not, you're discovering what you like, what kind of mechs you want to play. If we move into combined arms, total warfare, what kind of tanks that you want to play. So from this perspective, having a hierarchy of miniatures to purchase means you're going to play the stuff you like and then slowly expand your collection to include other pieces in your collection that you can experiment with, that you can add with, that you can build alternate lances, as opposed to the physical resources, the actual physical resources of acquiring miniatures. Kind of acquiring a bunch of everything that you're really not that sure about. Then you've got this huge pile of stuff, and then half of it you haven't played because you don't really enjoy it, or you haven't played it because you're still learning the game. It would be better to focus and move piece by piece. So let's come up with kind of a guideline. And I say guideline because certainly you might watch videos and be like, I love these mechs. I want to go in this direction. You might be part of a gaming group to move in another direction, or just maybe you had a great deal on a collection or you were part of the Kickstarter and you've got a flood of stuff. So we're just trying to build that list. Certainly start with mechs first. Absolutely. It's Battletech. Try to get a good mix of lights, mediums, heavies, and assaults. And this is pretty easy if you start with the game of Armored Combat and you put on some of the Lance packs, just going the pure Catalyst plastics. There's a lot of opportunities, a lot of great mechs in there, and a lot of different play styles and tactics that you can develop. So focus on the mechs first. Then after you focus on the mechs, you're going to jump into combined arms. And even if this is something that you're not always going to play based on your gaming group or your play style, it will help increase the type of missions that you can play. It'll give you different options, and it will open up Battletech, again, for that aspect. If you want to bolt it on, you'll be ready to do it. You'll be ready to go. But focus on the mechs first. Now, in terms of vehicles, I would start with some tanks. And, we have different tonnage like mechs. Start with a mix of light and medium and heavy tanks. Focus on tanks over hover vehicles. And the reason why I offer this, and certainly it's a suggestion, right? The reason why I offer this suggestion is hovercraft are kind of something unique in Battletech. I mean, I really think in the 80s, they thought futuristic warfare was all going to be hovercraft. And how is that going to play out? They were trying to image it. Hover vehicles, hovercraft are a very important part of Battletech. They offer some very, very unique tactics, but they're a little bit harder. They're a little bit harder to play. They've got some interesting rules. They take some interesting damage. They move around. They're very, very fast. It's easy to make mistakes with them. So by focusing on just good, classic tanks, that's going to bolt over your battle mech knowledge, and you'll be able to utilize that. After you fill out your tanks, then you're going to jump into some hover units. And then at that point, in acquiring some of those hover units, you will have enough player knowledge and player personality to not only know how to utilize them effectively, but then you might say, look, I love hover units, and I'm going to move my collection in that direction. Or you might say, look, I've got some hover units for missions, or if I want to try something out, but I really like tanks, and I want to stay in that. After we bolt those on, now we move into infantry. If you've been following my channel or looking through some of my vlogs, you know I love infantry for Battletech. Just the idea of infantry taking out mechs. It's that tabletop glory is something that absolutely I cannot resist. So I always play infantry. But infantry are interesting in that they're very low battle value, even when you jack them up. But they require a certain tactica to play. They require delivery systems. Now, you could go jump infantry, but even with jump infantry, you need a delivery system, ideally, to get bigger numbers, to not take them as jump infantry. So you're going to need APCs, which are vehicles. Well, we kind of have to know how to play vehicles first. You might go with goblins, which are vehicles, but they're also APCs, but they're also kind of tanks. So it would help to know how to play tanks first. And if you go with air support Karnovs, which are fantastic to play, they're kind of these flying dropships for infantry. At that point, you're going to be pulling in air support units. So this is why I say infantry is like the third tier. We acquire infantry models, you acquire delivery systems, and now this then opens up because you're going to want to get some Karnovs. I pushed up Karnov Tactica to my Battletech playlist here. You're going to want to look and now jump into air support. Looking at VTOLs, looking at fighter support, looking at some of the different aspects of that game and pulling it in. I say that for last because the rules for air support are very, very dynamic. They're a different phase of the game. It's Battletech, so it's going to be very familiar, but it requires a little bit more bookkeeping. It requires understanding elevation, and it has the potential to slow down the game a little bit as you become familiar with it. So we don't want to overwhelm things going straight in, but at some point you want to incorporate it. So then you got your air units. The last piece to collect. Or you could say the first piece because you're only going to need maybe 3 or 4 of these miniatures. So they're easy to acquire, and then you're done and you're good for a long time. Artillery. I love big guns. I love the long tom. Artillery is an interesting aspect of Battletech in that you call in ahead of time where you're going to shoot, where you're going to lay that artillery on the maps. So it's kind of guessing, although you could direct fire depending on the length of the map itself and depending on the artillery piece. But this idea of artillery being yet another type of rules that are layered in, that's going to be a little bit more bookkeeping. And artillery's, I was going to say, ironically, hit or miss. Artillery is the type of thing tactically you have to plan for it, because if you can maneuver your opponent to a place where you can hit them with artillery, it's going to be really satisfying and really devastating. But if they're just running around on the map, they're going to bypass it, and it's just going to be some interesting effects. In terms of the pieces themselves, we have the long tom miniature, you have thumpers, you have smaller artillery pieces. That is something that you fill out your collection with a long tom and 4 or 5 artillery pieces, and you're good. It's not like you're going to need 30 of these. So from that perspective, one could say, yeah, maybe you pick up the artillery pieces ahead of time, but let's bolt them on and let's tackle them last. So now I'm going to turn it over to you guys in the comments. And by no means is this like the definitive way to start building your Battletech collection or how to do it. A lot's going to depend on where you are, what resources you have. Certainly if you're like, look, I love tanks, I love these miniatures. You know, number one rule of Battletech, it's a miniature game. If there's something that looks really cool and you love the idea of it, pick it up, paint it, get it on the table and start rolling those dice. You know, don't wait to follow some hierarchy I've imposed, or you've read somewhere like you can't jump into this until you jump into that. But from that perspective of a new player, again, with this being the golden age of Battletech and so much stuff out there, coming up with a plan so you can get the maximum value on the table, the quickest turnaround in painting, and assemble your forces in such a way that not only do you have tactical options, but you can pull in my opinion, the most fun as much as possible.